Let me, there we go. We want to remind everybody that we're recording. We're so happy to see you all here. I'm Lisa Epstein. I'm the director of the Jewish Community Relations Council from the Jewish Federation of San Antonio. And I'm a proud member of this interfaith collaborative that has, among other things, put this training together. I just wanted to go over a few things before we get started. And yesterday we had this beautiful, don't see my slideshow working here. There we go. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. This beautiful, in front of City Hall, a press conference to announce this training and some other amazing work that this group is doing right now. You will start to see these billboards up around town that say love should not hurt. And they have the website that this group also established as a place for people to go that has all sorts of services for people who are dealing with domestic violence and domestic abuse. And we also coordinated with 211, which is a United Way phone number for services for throughout the city. And they are prepared and ready to accept calls from people. So it's really easy when you pass by these billboards, at the very least to remember 211. And then you're going to start to see these buses and city vehicles also with the same messaging on it. So some really great work that's happened here so far. And just as a reminder, this is a 4-part training. Next week will be part 2, helping, then healing, and then acting. And it's going to be at 11:30 at the same time at the same Zoom every week. So we hope you all will be able to attend all 4 of the trainings. But if not, come when you can. I wanted to just show you this amazing group of just some of the organizations that have been involved in this work and give our gratitude to all of them and the people behind the organizations. So today we're very fortunate to have as our speaker all the way from Washington, D.C., Lori Presbus. Dr. Presbus is a doctor of ministry and education director for Catholics for Family Peace. And that is an education and research initiative that provides education, resources, and research that help pastoral leaders recognize domestic abuse and respond with compassion. They collaborate with domestic violence awareness advocates from all faith traditions. Dr. Presbus is an author and international presenter to clergy, seminarians, parents, and parish ministers on healthy life, unhealthy relationships, and domestic violence. She's past president of National Catholic Family Life Ministers Association and former family life coordinator for the Archdiocese of Baltimore. So she's here this morning from Washington, D.C. We thank her and appreciate that she donated her time this morning and her hard work to share with us. And when you get an opportunity, www.catholicsforfamilypeace.org is an amazing website with lots of resources. And also, we had a speaker who was planned to come today who wasn't able to attend. And so we also thank Lori for stepping in and stepping up. And we're just really lucky to have her. So I will let Lori take over, and Karen Ball is going to also moderate and facilitate. Lori is going to have a couple times throughout the session she will have a natural stop for questions. So if you could stay muted until those moments, that would be really helpful.
Well, thank you for coming, everyone. I'm very happy to be meeting you. I love San Antonio. We did a family conference there some years ago with great collaboration from the community. Well, I'm happy to especially greet those who are clergy or working pastoral workers in your church or synagogue or other faith communities. And this is directed to you to help you to do the best you can to help people when they turn to you. I'll be sharing some slides here, but I guess the beginning of talking about this topic is to recognize that our focus that we're all interested in our faith traditions, is to recognize that religion can be a resource for people experiencing domestic violence, or they may find it to be a roadblock. People will turn to you as a person of, they know you're a person of faith. Maybe you are actually their clergyman or a local clergyman, and they want to trust you and to help you to help them to find safety. Now, all of our religions encourage victims to recognize their own dignity. And this human dignity is the key that we're all working toward. But people often may find a roadblock when they someone of faith. And because the clergymen themselves or their friends and neighbors who are religious may have misinterpretations of their church or religious teaching, that would lead to victims blaming themselves, or just in general having the wrong response to their needs. Mother Teresa puts it well when she gives a good reason for faith leaders to look at people who approach them with love rather than judgment. She says, if you judge people, you don't have time to love them. So if we just think about loving people as they come to us, that's all of us in our religious beliefs look at love and human dignity. So that's where we're going to start with. Your role is to understand, right? And not to convince someone to leave their abusive relationships. Just as we value human dignity, we value the person's self-determination. So telling a woman what she must do is just more of the same kind of behavior that she's been experiencing from her abuser, forcing her, telling her what she has to do, taking away her agency. And instead, we want to strive to understand the complexities involved in an abusive relationship, which this series of 4 trainings will help you to do. Now, this hearing that we're doing is also about deep listening. And so you all know these principles, but sometimes we forget them, right? About looking people in the eye and giving them focused attention, being slow to speak, to let their story unfold. We who are religious leaders often want to talk too much. And maybe your congregation would agree with that. But the practicing holding your tongue, letting the story unfold, letting people tell their story and explain themselves their way is really something for you to practice. When you're going to ask questions, do it in a spirit of curiosity. Rather than to try to blame someone or to speak badly about the partner that is abusive. Just ask open-minded questions so that you can learn more and show that you are interested. An example of this, you will find people turn to you at unexpected times. I was in a reception with some youth ministers, and one of them who knew that I was interested in domestic violence approached me privately, like in the corner, and said there was a lady from her church that was experiencing, that came to her privately and said, my husband is beating me up. And the youth minister was surprised to hear that, because that man was a pillar of the church community, secretly abusing his family. And so the youth minister asked me, what can I do? And so the first thing I said to her was, you have to keep listening. person, this lady has come to you, and maybe it's the first church person that has been able to listen to her. We're going to listen with compassion, and this is the kind of advice that I gave to the youth minister to demonstrate how she's ready to listen, that she's ready to talk to her, that I want to help you in every way you want me to. And I won't share what you tell me with anyone unless you want me to. If you don't want to talk about it right now, that's okay. And so that she's going to walk along with this woman and her family until the woman is ready to do more. So important in listening to people is to validate the person's feelings, to let her know that she's not alone, and to express your compassion for them, that you know that this was a hard thing for them to do, to approach you, and just to wait and see. Accompaniment, walking along with people, is our task as religious people, to listen to the stories, ask and then take time to listen, maybe prompt with prompts, but rather than being intrusive or certainly not blaming. This is a huge effort that they have made to seek your help, and they don't need you to fix the situation. They need to find a way to be safe, and you can help them with that. They have given you a gift by trusting you. One of the things that you're not going to do is to insist that they come and worship with your church community or your faith community, to just keep them company and offer to, but don't impose or assume anything. The more you listen, the more they will trust you, and the more you'll be able to offer resources to them that could help them if they want them. Before, let's see if I can go back. Well, at this point, is there any comments or questions that you would like to offer? Just unmute yourself.
So Patricia has pointed out a couple things, confirming things that you've been saying all along, Lori, in the chat. So I invite her if she wants to piggyback on anything you've presented so far. Patricia?
Yeah, I just want to, I'm just trying to embellish a little bit of everything that you're saying that is perfect, Lori. And just some things that I know from the perspective of the hands-on work with survivors for all the years that I've done it, and just some little things that, for people to just acknowledge, also when they're having these experiences of advocating for survivors.
Thank you. Thank you. I will tell you more of the story of the youth minister and the family. My advice to her was to continue to accompany that woman. There was nothing that she could do safely to address the abuser, who was well respected even by the clergy of his church, but to just know that unless it became possible to have that conversation with the pastor, her boss, right, to just continue to work and be beside the person. I think we're talking about being rather than doing, to be beside that person until she asked for more help.
Lori, we do have one question from Rachel Miller in regards to confidentiality. Obviously, clergies are to keep information confidential, but then we also run into that boundary line of mandatory reporting. And so I think that's what Rachel is trying to get at here. Rachel, do you want to unmute if I've misunderstood your question?
Thanks. I think that gets at it, right?
Right.
I understand, you know, when working with adults, tending to their stories and holding their stories in confidentiality is one thing. And if you're working with youth or children who come to you with a story of abuse, then it feels like the responsibility becomes a wider responsibility to act and respond.
Thank you, Rachel, for bringing that up, because you're right that for when adults are involved, there's no mandatory reporting. In fact, involving the police or other people who were not who the victim did not want you to talk to, that could be dangerous for her. But when children are involved, yes, you generally, it depends on your location, but generally, if there's a question of children's safety, then you would want to involve your superiors, perhaps law enforcement, but always remembering that once the police enter the conversation, there can be more danger for them. Patricia, your hand is up.
Yeah, I would just like to add that it's mandatory reporting for children and elders
Oh, thank you.
over
Yeah.
the age of 65.
Vulnerable people and vulnerable people of
Yeah.
any age.
That's right. And the reason why we don't have mandatory reporting for domestic violence adults is because what we found is that in other states where they had mandatory reporting for battered women, the outcome, what manifested was that the women went underground.
Right.
And
Right.
then they became even more vulnerable because
Right.
they wouldn't, they didn't want this automatic reporting to police and, to everybody. And so they would just go underground and we'd lose them. We'd never have contact with them again. And so that's why in Texas, we never instituted mandatory reporting for
Right.
battered women.
But fortunately, with some things that we do have, and you're going to be hearing in the course of our series, are safety measures that people can easily and access for free. Just a reminder about how domestic violence can be kind of a cycle that there's often a honeymoon period in which the person who was violent says, "Oh, I'm never doing that again. Here's some flowers." Until then, something sparks another reaction, and it just kind of becomes a cycle of violence. Now, and I think a lot of people don't know that when we're talking about abuse, it doesn't need to leave a mark. Physical, sexual, stalking, verbal abuse, when there's never a touch, but it can be even more soul killing. And also economic abuse, which would be just control of a person's finances. Someone who has immigration concerns may also be more vulnerable because the abuser may threaten, and she may be frightened that law enforcement would not be on her side. A person might not even recognize that they're being abused, that they just think that's how things are. Maybe there's been a generational pattern of the way people treat one another, and make excuses for the man, not just because they're afraid of him, but because they truly love him. And they just are hoping that things will change. This is a person who needs a friend, maybe you, to walk with them and to help them recognize if they're in danger. There are so many things that people who are victims of abuse are dealing with. They may be isolated, they may be ashamed. It doesn't matter what area, what economic level someone's at. This happens in all neighborhoods and all kinds of families. Also, your and all sexualities too. So if people have, experienced repeated trauma, it makes it hard for them to seek help. So imagine how big this is that someone has turned to you. So, as a clergy person, you want the truth of your faith to be lived by that person, the truth of the love of God for them, and their inherent dignity. But the person who's been beaten down, even emotionally, is going to actually have very low self-esteem, and also may express to you that they're afraid, physically afraid of being killed. So someone might ask you, why is this happening to me? And is it something that I did? My sin has caused this. If your faith tradition is upholding lifelong marriage, indissoluble marriage, a person might not realize that doesn't mean someone can be beaten by the marriage. Is not a license to abuse. In my faith tradition, in the Catholic tradition, we have clear teaching that person has a right to get out of a dangerous marriage situation. And so you are a representative for God for that person. So you want to give them the love of God, and rather than the judgment that they might fear from religion. We want to be walking in solidarity with these victims, and always respecting their agency and to their own freedom, because this has been taken away from them by their abuser. In the future sessions, we'll give you more information about referring people for help in the community. A lot of clergy are worried that they won't know how to help. And it's very freeing to us to realize we don't have to solve the situation, that we're part of a community of helpers, and that we need to find out who they are. Just identifying for yourself who the helpers are in the community through this series, and also by just doing your own research, maybe even visiting a woman's shelter, or finding out, having a conversation with your local police department. It might raise their awareness also. So if someone asks you to help them, see what you can do to help them, to move that along. Now, at this point, this would be a good chance for anyone else to comment here.
Lori, we do have a comment or two in
Good.
chat. So
time.
Dr. Julie Kelly, you've posted one or two things. Do you want to share?
Sure, that's pastor. Did I put it in D? Oh, no, okay. Whew.
Oh, I'm
All right.
sorry.
I was gonna say, thanks for the promotion.
So it looks like a D for me. I apologize.
No, that's okay. Yeah, so I had also commented that sometimes abuse can look like the control, especially in military families, can look like control of benefits. Many military families are one-car families because we move so much, et cetera. And so there's a limit to finances, benefits, vehicles, things like that. And because those are the folks who are separated from their family systems, that can be very isolating. But my question was further on, I think it was slide 12 or 13, and you were talking about basically, nope, sorry, next one. Yes, okay, these questions here. And these are, I believe, challenging the narratives that have been inappropriately put forth by many religions through, it takes, for hundreds of years in the Christian religion, we said suicide was a sin. Right. Now that has shifted, and yet on the daily, we hear people who still think that that is the case. And so challenging that, which is what we're doing when we answer some of these questions, sometimes it is a challenge to a narrative that people have lived with their whole life. And I'm thinking about how that can create a secondary crisis, because we do know that just challenging a narrative in a normal life can sometimes create a crisis. Are there suggestions on how to handle that? I don't even know where to go with that. I feel like that's its own class all on its own.
Right. It's, if your sacred scriptures include something that has been misused to make people feel that they must forgive and stay in a dangerous situation. I think knowing your scriptures intimately yourself, so that you can give a corrective explanation to people. And when people say, well, why did my mother teach me that? Or why have I always heard that? And it's I think can be comforting more than upsetting to hear, well, people might have thought that in the past, but we are coming to see how that's just not correct. And I think it's part of the ongoing revelation of God in a person's life and in a church's life, in a faith tradition's life, to move beyond that. And your example about suicide is excellent, because there are certain things that people were always taught, but probably always bothered them, like that someone is going to hell if they die by suicide. I think that it's more comforting than it would be upsetting. But I think to come up with some other examples of how, well, slavery, that in history, Abraham Lincoln is said to have said that God has tolerated slavery so long that his ministers feel compelled to defend it. So, there are certain misunderstandings that have been shown to be untrue. And I think that clergy can find those examples if they need to talk about domestic violence. And, when you're talking about marriage and someone has always heard that they should be submissive and to their husband, to explain what that kind of submission means in the context of being submissive to God, and not, that doesn't mean that someone has a license to abuse another person. Does that help?
A little bit. It's probably more of an existential question that I'm going to have to sit and struggle with, because I know that it's its own journey in a conversation and having to feel it out. But I guess I had just never noticed that it could also create a secondary crisis for someone. And I'm all of a sudden I'm going, wait, have I created a secondary crisis for someone who was already in crisis, rather than potentially helping them, and maybe an awareness of gentleness with my own scriptures in that situation is
Right.
something that I have to start really bringing to the forefront in these particular kinds of situations.
I think that you pastors and preachers have an opportunity to shape your whole congregation in these more deeper understandings of your traditions. So rather than just it being between you and the victim as a private conversation, that you can find times when you're able to address those situations in a more general way, to bring up the understanding of the whole congregation. Has anyone else?
Well, we have two questions. We have
Okay.
one hand raised, and we also have a question in terms of whether men can be victims. Is this still good question time for you?
Yes, this is great. We have plenty
Okay,
of time.
Jeanette, feel free to unmute and ask
Go
your
ahead,
question.
Jeanette. Yes, I can say, Jeanette, that in fact, the statistics are like 4-to-1 with between women and men victims, I believe, or anyone who can correct me on those statistics. But we know that certainly men can be victims of that kind of abuse. I'm thinking I have a nephew whose wife was abusive, tried to kill him. There's somebody on the news just last night. Someone was murdered by his wife. I think that this is why it's important to have this message in your preaching. If you're a preacher in your faith tradition, to get a message out for everyone, because in your congregation, there are people who are experiencing domestic violence who will never turn to you. Or in your congregation, there will be friends or family members of someone who's experiencing that violence, and they may be a first responder, so that they need correct information too. Yes.
Jeanette, do you have and Patricia put in more details about males being impacted by
Thanks, Patricia.
domestic violence.
Not hearing you, Jeanette.
There's something wrong with the audio. You appear to be unmuted.
Sometimes in your setup, your microphone is set up some other way, but
Nope, still not hearing you.
well, if you put your thoughts into the chat, Jeanette, Karen will share them with us. Anyone else like to have some input right now?
Yes, ma'am. This is Apostle Ernest Hollins. I was the one who had asked the question concerning the male. I am counseling presently a friend of mine who for years have had to deal with a wife who had been abused. And she has not been delivered from that, or have not received the help that she needed. So it's been a fight for him to try to have a healthy relationship. She's very abusive. It's almost like she have him on a rope, and anything that he does, it's almost a reflection of what she had experienced. And so again, that vicious cycle, one who is abused turn around and abuse someone else, and he's going through that. I would just like to know, basically, I get some wisdom to be able to help a person. Being a male, I am very empathetic to the many females who are being abused, but there are so many men who are, but being a man, they don't want to share it, because it's kind of macho type of situation. But again, it is a real concern, and we really need prayer in that area.
Right.
And
Well,
assistance.
it's so good that your friend has turned to you, and that's really what men need, is other men who will be compassionate and understanding, and be helpful to them. And the same resources that are available to women are available to men, except I don't, as far as shelters go, probably not. But it is pretty heart-wrenching to be in a marriage or relationship in which someone is experiencing violence from the person that they love the most in the world, or they can't get away from them because they're tied to them by children or by economics. I think that recognizing everyone's God-given dignity is something that we need to continue to preach, and to remind people of a loving God rather than a judging God.
Thank
And
you.
Ernest, if you are local in San Antonio, men are accepted at the family violence prevention services, so they can get shelter.
Oh, well, that's wonderful.
Right. Could you give me that again, please?
Patricia, can you put it in the chat for me?
Oh, good. So, you know, from
I will.
every
you.
community has different resources. It's kind of spotty, you know. Our initiative got started in the Washington, DC area, but we have a national reach with partners all over the country. From the Catholic perspective, we're working mainly with our partners that are in Catholic parishes, but having this opportunity to talk to people from other faith traditions has shown us how this is a wider issue from which we can learn from each other. It doesn't matter our doctrines, it's more our concern for people's safety. So this is having, we learned that it's different all over the country, what kind of resources are available. So you have to just maybe have a little committee in your church that will just dig up all the resources for you so that you have them at your fingertips. Plus those little church communities, given that task, their awareness is raised, so that some places even have domestic violence outreach programs where they extend the pastor's reach by doing education and also maybe helping people directly with direct services.
Jeanette, would you like to try and unmute one more time? She did put a comment in the chat that in regards to having a male friend that was abused with severe alcoholism.
Right. Yes, it's true. I think that all of us are in a position to be approached by a friend who trusts us. And we may not be official clergy in our, I'm not a clergy person, but I have an opportunity to talk to people just like the youth minister I mentioned. Any other questions, Karen?
Yeah, there was she was following up on that. I was in the midst of reading it.
Okay, go ahead.
So a devoted believer expressing that even though he is safe as well as the children and has divorced, the abuser believes that in God's word, he is still married to her. So it sounds like, you know, questioning some of those narratives that the church has instilled.
Mm-hmm. Well, it depends on your faith tradition, what you know, the teaching people are following about divorce and marriage. So I can only speak for my own faith tradition, and I can say that in my faith tradition, if someone has, you know, entered into a marriage vow falsely, then their marriage was not valid. But and that's something that your clergy person for a Catholic would, but also in different faith traditions have different attitudes about divorce. And if you haven't explored that more deeply in your own faith tradition, that would be a good thing to know about, because that's the attitudes that your fellow congregants are going to have about getting out of a dangerous situation. And I suppose if someone believed that they were still married in God's eyes to their abusive spouse, even after they divorced, then they would need counseling about how to manage their life going forward, and also their attitudes about God.
Yeah, we have another hand up. Mignon, would you like to unmute?
Yes, that kind of came from a conversation about, when people will come and say God hates divorce. And it goes back to what you were saying, Lori, trying to point them to understand the character of God. Because the question then becomes, is what you're currently in honoring God? Does you being abused, does that honor God? And trying to, because there are people who just believe God wants me to suffer, and because God hates divorce, I must stay in this situation.
Right.
So oftentimes you just have to have the conversation or try to help people not see God as someone who wants them to suffer or someone who has co-signed off on their suffering.
Right. Oh, that's a very good point, Mignon. When we know that divorce is a tragedy, no matter what has led to it. And I think in that regard, God hates divorce because it is, that's a tragedy has happened that family broke apart. But if God also loves that beloved son and daughter and does not want them to be beaten by their spouse. This whole idea of having to forgive, even when someone has not changed. You can do a lot of preaching on the whole concept of forgiveness, that people can forgive, but they also can get away from the dangerous situation they're in. And forgiveness does not require someone to put themselves back in a dangerous situation. Sometimes reconciliation is just not possible. So forgiveness sometimes cannot include reconciliation because the other party has not changed. I think that we all experience how someone will focus on, one bit of scripture and not see the bigger picture of God's love. Patricia has her hand up.
Patricia?
I was, when I worked in the battered women's shelter, I was always struck by how often women would tell me that, the scripture was used against them.
Uh-huh.
That you're supposed to forgive 7 times 77 and that you're supposed to, submit, to your spouse because it's written in the scripture. And, and so if you went strictly by all of that, I mean, those women were set up to be killed eventually,
Yeah,
and so,
unfortunately.
yes. And so we had to continuously challenge how, the scripture was distorted and interpreted in ways that allowed for the violence to continue.
Right. That's very unfortunate that people use marriage as an excuse for hurting others. No one would think that a child sexual abuse victim would have to stay vulnerable to an abuser. Nobody would think that. They would want them to get to help. So marriage does not excuse abuse for people. And I think all of our faith traditions would agree with that. But unfortunately, people have, they say a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. And so a lot of people have a little knowledge of their faith tradition and they don't have a broader vision. So that's why it's so important for clergy to be able to teach them correctly so that they can broaden their ideas. Another thing another concept that is, we honor that can be used against victims of abuse could be obedience. People are told, you must obey adults. And so if children are always taught they must obey adults and without asking any questions, if someone is abusive to them, they may feel like they must obey because that was an adult. So it's important to teach everyone a deeper understanding of things like forgiveness, obedience, all of the values that, yes, we want to be able to forgive when someone has harmed us, so that we can reconcile with them. But if reconciliation is not possible or even safe or advisable, we also need to accompany people to get away from those dangerous situations. And, evil in the world tends to prey on the good things that we're trying to teach and distort them for evil purposes. So people of faith have an opportunity to stand up against evil. And be so blunt. So abuse and violence against your family members is evil. And so we have a desire to help the victim. I wanted to say also, though, that just like in my story about the youth minister, the abuser is also in your congregation. And maybe the opportunity could happen for an abuser to turn to you and say, I can't control my temper. If someone who's doing those kind of things turns to you, that you also should have resources for that abusive person to get help. Because imagine what that would take for someone to turn to you and tell you, I want to change. Just like if someone in your congregation was addicted to alcohol and they turn to you, hey, pastor, I don't know what to do. You would have resources to send them to someone that or AA or local resources. It's also important to have on your desktop some resources for someone to get help for domestic violence. Someone was reminding us that domestic violence is often part of other problems, like alcohol and drug use. Some people fall into those addictions to self-medicate when they're dealing with it. So there are, other related problems that your project there in San Antonio is going to raise those questions.
Yes.
Lori, I would just, if I could call one other thing from chat that's coming up is prior to marriage, like a marriage counseling. I know as a Catholic, my husband and I had to go through a preparation before the priest would marry us. And I did, that was some 30 years ago. I don't remember anything about domestic violence in that conversation.
Yeah, you're right.
So, there again is what advice would you have for these faith leaders in terms of touching on,
I agree. Well,
warning signals that they might see while dating?
I think you're right on there. I think often when we're, preparing a couple for marriage, we kind of focus on the happy parts of family life and how uplifting and important family life is. And it gets left out of the conversation, the dark sides of a relationship. And we recognize that at Catholics for Family Peace, and we developed a pre-marriage module, 30 minutes, that could be inserted into the counseling or a group program that I will share with everyone, that you can adapt it to your own faith tradition, because it basically just gives this information to a engaged person, and it includes a little how healthy is your relationship personal inventory, not it's not for discussion but it's for someone to have privately to assess for themselves. By the time someone's getting ready to get married, they're pretty far down the road in knowing that person, and they may recognize in that person some potential for harm that they have been, blind to, or mistakenly thinking that that was how women and men treat each other. So yes, education is really a good thing that can be shared, that can help people to at least be alerted to watch out for unhealthy relationships. They may not wake up to it until years down the road, but they'll look back and say, my faith leader mentioned this, and I'm seeing this happening in my life. So education, and I highly recommend that this kind of education happen much younger, before people are getting ready to get married. So your high schoolers, teen dating, violence issues. There are more and more good resources out there addressing teens to look for healthy relationships.
Yes, and Sharon was kind enough to post that into the
good.
chat. We're kind of running up against time here, Lori. So
Okay.
if you could just in maybe the next 2 or 3 minutes sum up the crucial points that you think you need to leave us with.
Okay, so let me just say that when it comes time after you've listened, you want to tell people no one deserves to be treated this way, that this is not part of a loving, healthy relationship. You didn't cause it. You can't change the other person. You can only seek safety, and I'll help you to find it. I'll support you. Don't say to people, why don't you just leave? Don't say, why do you tolerate this behavior? Because don't you know that leaving is the most dangerous time for someone in a violent situation. And certainly not recommending couples counseling or saying, well, bring your husband in here and I'll talk to the both of you. That is just a recipe for further violence once he's out of your sight. So loving and not judging. So, and not speaking badly about the other person. And certainly people often think that this would be their fault. So in future, you're going to be learning more about safety planning and help and ways that you can actually help, and about referring people to someone who can be helpful to them.
And I just want to acknowledge that some people are putting some items in chat. I know Rabbi has put something in chat. The last two things that I included in chat is here in San Antonio. You can go to sacred.org for the portal on Love Should Not Hurt. And there's a link here for you that will provide all the resources in terms of this is where people can find immediate assistance, and then with continuing services, how can we respond to survivors and help accompany them, as you pointed out, Lori. And then I also included in there the ccdv.org. I was on this website this morning. They have an upcoming conference in October. I believe it's the 5th and 6th. Do I have those dates right, Patricia? Yes, the 5th and 6th of October. But their previous ones are online. So as I was scrolling through, there was great resources from previous years in terms of the impact of domestic violence on children that, that's available for you to kind of go and do your own research at your own leisure.
And you'll find resources about the effect of violence on children on our catholicsforfamilypeace.org website, and as well as other webinars that we did in collaboration with Catholic Charities USA.
And Rajam, I just want to point out, she said Awaz is another organization. They are in the portal. I remember putting them in there. So we can find information there. Is there anybody who has a last minute question? Right, I'm not seeing any hands. I want to thank you all for coming.
Sharon had a comment.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to commend San Antonio and all the people involved with this Interfaith Coalition. It's absolutely amazing what a difference you'll make. And it's a blessing that you have responded to the whispers to be organized. And you're likely to never know how many people you'll touch, but it's worth every effort that you make. So blessings upon everyone.
And we thank both you and Lori for coming today, especially on very short notice. So for all of you who are in attendance, remember this is the first of a series of 4. We welcome you to come to all 4, but we acknowledge that you all have busy lives and that may not be possible. But Anne is kindly recording these, so we will have that access and make that available to you if you do miss one. And it's not too late to go into your parishes and say, hey, I went to this great informative Zoom today, and encourage people to come join us next Thursday at 11:30. Anne or Lisa, do you have any final remarks for anybody?
All the gratitude to Laurie and Catholics for Family Peace. This was so informative, and to all of you for participating. It was a beautiful discussion. And next week we have Patricia Castillo from the Peace Initiative leading with Reverend Janice Gordson, who's also here today. We'll also be leading with her, just really 2 experts in the field. So I can't wait for next week, where we're going to talk about helping, the next step for everyone. So thank you all again for being here. If you have any other questions or things, please, you can email me, you can email Anne, and we will hope to see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a blessed day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.